Look out for that falling shoe!
Hi everyone and welcome to Wathan Creations. Today we're making the handsomest, squiddiest boy around, but with a little touch of weird. We've got our wire armature bulked out with some aluminum foil, so the next thing to do is start layering on the green clay to build up his musculature. Once our jolly green not-so-giant is covered in clay, I'll start smushing on various lumps and slabs for the muscles. My vision for this is to take Handsome Squidward's bodybuilder aesthetic and make everything just a wee bit extra. Originally, up until this point, I was actually sculpting a disco orc, but then my fiance leaned over my shoulder and asked, "Are you making Handsome Squidward?" Well, I sure am now. We'll change the positioning of the body to strike a new pose, then blend all the muscles in together to get something that looks smooth and beefy. If you saw the thumbnail, you may be thinking to yourself, "Hey, isn't this all gonna get covered up with clothes in a few minutes?" Unfortunately, you're right. But the good news is that you all get to see this whole process. What's under Squidward's shirt and shorts can be our little secret. Shh. An issue I encountered throughout this project was that my armature was made of wire that was too thin for a project of this girth, so I kept having to reposition his torso and legs into a proper mid-flail pose. To smooth out the sculpture and refine the shapes of his bodybuilder physique, I'll break out my loop tools, gently scraping away clay bit by bit. I'll also spend some quality time on his bikini bottom, because that's what we're all here for. To finish up the smoothing process, I'll wash his whole body in isopropyl alcohol, then take my homemade trypophobia roller to add all sorts of gentle bumps and lumps onto his body. The cartoon version of Squidward is frighteningly smooth, and while I could have definitely done that and called it a day, I thought having a bumpily squid just felt a tad bit more realistic and interesting. Then with a flick of the wrist, we're on to the head. This took a few different tries to get right, including a phase where I was actually planning on giving Squidward an actual squid for a head. But eventually I stumbled my way into a decent jawline and eyebrows, and the rest started to fall into place from there. His mouth starts off as a cavern that can get refined into a luscious shape with some silicone shapers and ball styluses. A long noodle of clay becomes his lips, and then I can plunge in an esophagus and plop a tongue into place. Squidman's eyes start as puffy half-moons of clay that get blended into his face. Then I'll carve a separation between the top and bottom lid to show that they're tightly closed in upturned agony. His head gets the obligatory alcohol treatment to smooth out all my imperfections, and then we'll use our texture roller to carry over the body texture onto the head. For the hard-to-reach nooks and crannies, I'll poke and prod with a ball stylus to make sure that no parts of Handsome Squidward remain undimpled. Some quick final forehead creasing, and then we're ready to pop this disco ball on its disco haul. I don't actually know what that's supposed to mean. Once his neck is blended into his shoulders, I'll give him some hands and feet. Each tentacle is a simple affair of suckers suctioned to a clay pad, blended and textured with ball styluses until they look nice and grippy. And then our handsome boy is nearly done, but he's looking a little bit too naked. To cover his shame, I'll take some sheets of brown clay and cut them into a bow tie for his undercarriage, then some shirt-shaped shapes for his upper body. I deviated a little bit from the original shirt design since I wanted to show off a little bit of his chest and abs. Some rolling with a large ball stylus will help me vacuum seal the clay against his skin, showing off all the lovely muscles underneath. And then I'll clean up some of the edges before using a scrap of canvas to impart some cloth texture onto the shirt clay. His belt is a simple black stripe textured with a toothbrush. Then we can finish off the sculpting with a large square buckle and give Squidward one final bake. The thin armature wire sadly proved too flimsy to hold his bulk upright, but that's nothing that super glue can't fix. Since the colored clay provides a good base coat for his skin shading, I'll paint Handsome Squidward's dermis with a healthy light blue dry brushing. This brings out the dimply texture and also highlights all the raised muscly edges and puffy face lumps. Then once the dry brushing is dry, I'll come back in with a watery blue wash to tie everything together, add a little bit of shading, and give his skin a nice slight gleam. After checking my reference photos, I realized that his clothes were a bit too dark, so I repainted the browns with a lighter brown before dry brushing them in an even lighter brown just for fun. I'll repaint the black belt buckle black and dry brush it with my darkest brown to just barely show off the leathery textures. Then I'll tickle the buckle with some gold paint to make it gleam. His tentacles get washed with a deep purpley wash to sink into all that texture, and then I'll paint his mouth and tongue with a few shades of red, before lining his lips in a pale pink. To make our squid hairy, I'll apply some glue to his underarm and chest, and then add some light brown static grass. Nearly complete, I'll sop his tentacles and his open mouth with some UV resin to make them look wet. I'm not really sure if this was necessary since Squidward lives underwater, so technically all of him should be wet. But hey, what's a little extra wetness gonna hurt? Lastly, I'll use a black wash to darken up his hairy pits and chest. And with our furry squid painted, it's time to make a base. Our handsome man will be standing on some simple foam covered in popsicle stick planks. To make the planks look more planky, I'll scratch in some wood grain texture with a sharp tool, then carve the edges with a knife to make them look more like imperfect boards of wood. I'll make sure to save all of this spicy shrapnel for a later project. With some hot glue to hold them all in place, I'll lay down the wooden boards just a little bit cattywampus. I want the restaurant floor to look like it was made using the cheapest labor and materials possible, with minimal maintenance and repair. Then it all gets a thick black base coat before I paint the floorboards with several coats of green. Then the back hump with some layers of brown. To cover up all of my dry brushing and sink into the grooves, I'll cover the base in more black wash, dabbing away the excess with a paper towel. Then I can dry brush the entire surface to highlight all of the wood textures and sharpen the crisp edges. These boards need to be nailed down though, and what better nails than teeny tiny rhinestones. I'll pick these up upside down and then attach them to the boards where nails would be. At first I had a little bit of trouble getting them to stay down, but eventually I found that if you press them through the glue into the board, hold for a moment, and then lift back up, they were much more likely to stay in place. I left a few nail spaces blank so that we could have a little bit of fun making some nails sticking up out of the wood. To do this, I took some bent fragments of wire, stuck them into the wood, and then attached a rhinestone nail head to the top. It worked a charm, and I'm really pleased with how they turned out. Then each nail gets painted chainmail gray, but after being underwater for years and years, you'd imagine that the metal would have started to corrode. Krusty Krab? More like Rusty Krab, am I right? Yes, I did plan this whole paint scheme around that joke, but it was totally worth it. The rest is painted using a thin red-brown wash topped with a bright orange wash, streaking the paint as needed. Then we can stick our tetanus Squidward into place, add a spatula, and finally the falling shoe that started it all. Thank you all so much for watching this slightly cursed version of Handsome Squidward. I had a wee of a time making it, and I hope you enjoyed it too. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you like what you see, consider subscribing. More weird things are on their way.